Here I'm going to show you some great tips for recording macros in Excel. So we're going to go through the process from recording the macro to going and looking at the code. I'll show you what you can remove from the code and how to make it work a lot better. And I'll explain the different sections that often pop up when you record macros. And I'll cover relative cell references and explain why they're not always that helpful. And then at the end, I'll show you a very good way to get more information about code in the macro that you might not understand, which is exactly how I do it if I need more information. Before we start, check the video description and click the link to TeachExcel so you can download the files for the tutorial and follow along. And make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials. Now you can record a macro by going to the View tab, going over here under Macros and clicking Record Macro, or you can go to the bottom left of Excel and click this little dude here to record macros. But if you're just starting out working with macros, you might as well go ahead and get the Developer tab up here. It makes it a little bit easier, a couple more options. So to do that, go to the File tab. Then you want to go to Options. So Options all the way down here. And go to Customize Ribbon. This may look a little different depending on your version of Excel. And then go over here on the right and make sure that Developer is checked. And hit OK. And you should have the Developer tab now. So now we can record the macro, and there's the other button to view the macros, relative cell references, but you can also change the macro security settings because it may be set so that you can't use macros right now. So you can go here for that, change those, and click this button to go to the VBA window. That's the same as hitting Alt F11 on the keyboard. So just show the Developer tab. It'll make life easier when making this. Now, for the example I want to show you is, let's start off with something simple, something that a lot of people do when recording a macro, which is formatting. So the first thing that we're going to do is just start to record the macro. So let's click Record Macro. You can change the name here to whatever you want. In this case, it doesn't matter. I'm going to leave it as the default name. If you try to enter an incorrect name, so ASDF space ASDF, it'll say that there's an error because there's a space there. So you can see here what you can do. It has to start with a letter or an underscore, no spaces, no goofy characters, and nothing that conflicts with the name in the workbook. So give it a basic name. Let's say basic underscore name. Okay? And you don't really need to worry about where you store the workbook or where you store the macro in. You can just leave that as default for now. And honestly, I wouldn't even mess with description or shortcut key. Let's keep things simple right now. Hit OK. Okay, now anything that we do is being recorded. So anywhere I click, any button I hit, it's being recorded. Pretty much anything with the cells down here. So let's say I want to go ahead and I want to format this right here, stores. Okay, I click stores. Now let's go to the home tab. Let's say we want to make this guy bold. And let's say we want to make him underlined. Let's say we want to change the color a little bit, maybe light blue or darkish light blue. Okay. Now let's go ahead and center him. All right, now we finished recording our macro. What you can do is go down here to the bottom left of the screen and click the little stop button right there to stop recording the macro. Or we can go to either the View or Developer tab and hit Stop Recording. Now let's go take a look at our macro. Hit the Visual Basic button here or the shortcut, keyboard shortcut, as you can see there, Alt F11. And now what you do is go to the Modules folder right here, hit the plus button, open it up, and click Module 1. This is where all your macros are going to be stored. Okay, so let's take a look at it. When Excel records macros, they add a lot of crap, basically, and a lot of confusing stuff. And when you actually write your own macros, you're not going to include a lot of the stuff that's here when you go to record it. So here's our macro, basic name, that's the name we gave it. And here's just some notes up here, no worries. And let's see. So the first line is range A2 dot select. Now that immediately means that our macro is not relative. So if we go to run this macro again, it's not going to run on the cell that we click. It's always going to run on range A2. So if we go back here, you can see that stores is in cell A2. So when we clicked that cell to make it the active cell, that was recorded in the macro. And so now it says range A2 select. So that's the first thing. So if I like my formatting here and I want to now select some other cells and apply the formatting to that using the macro, it's not going to work. It's always going to go to cell A2. So just go ahead and delete this line. And you're going to see this a lot. Anywhere you click within the workbook, it's going to select that cell in the macro. So it's very good to have the cell that you want to have something applied to already selected. That will allow you to make the macro relative. So for instance, let's try this out right now. I'll show you what I mean. Let's go ahead and remove the formatting from this guy. Home tab. Over here, clear formats. Okay. Now let's go and run the macro. You can hit Alt F8 or click the button right there. Now I want it to apply to February because I just want some formatting. Run. Nope, it goes back to stores. So and one thing to note, if I hit Control Z right now, it does not undo the formatting changes. So anything that's done with a macro, you cannot undo it by hitting Control Z. That's very important to know before you have a big issue. Okay, so clear the format again. Go to February. Okay, Visual Basic. Now let's go ahead and delete this guy. And then go back to the window. Macro, Alt F8 or that button. Hit run and watch February change. Perfect. And if I wanted to, I could go ahead and select all of these guys now, run the macro, and it applies to all of them. So as long as when you record a macro, you have a cell already selected, everything you do will be relative. That means that when I go to use the macro again, it will apply to whichever cells I select. So that's actually that's the most common thing you have to worry about or you have to change when you're recording your macros. Make sure that it can't select anything up here. Now what I may do actually is just to leave it in here, but put a little comment at the beginning of it. So now it's commented out. If I put that little quote, single quotation mark there, this will not run anymore. So what I can do is put a little comment that tells you what it does. It's commented out, so it still will not run. That way when you download the workbook, you can have that in there as reference. Now let's talk about the next things. So selection dot. We've got a lot of selection dots down here. Selection dot, and then we have this annoying with end with thing, which is so confusing the first time you see it. So selection is exactly what it sounds like. It means do something with the currently selected cell. Now this is different than active cell, by the way, and I'll cover that in a moment because it's a very important distinction. But essentially this means a cell is selected. Okay, now do something with it. Let's change the font. What part of the font do we want to change? Bold. What do we want to set it to? True. Now I'm not going to cover each one of these little things down here and each one of these elements. I'll tell you how to find more information about them in a moment. But the important thing here is that this says selection because it could also say range A2 or range whatever, range A1 million, range whatever. Font dot bold equals true. So let's make some space. So we can reference a specific cell like this. You can also do this referencing named ranges if I replace A2 with the name of the range. So that's the cell to reference. Here it just says reference the currently selected cell. This will also, as you saw when I ran the macro, run on every single selected cell. So if I select a range of cells, it will run on all of those. So I'll put a comment right here. Do something on a specific cell. Okay. Let's do a comment down here. Do something on all of the selected cells. And the next one, which you may often see, although you don't really see it when you go to record a macro, is active cell. So let's go ahead and change the font as well. Active cell dot font dot bold equals true. And let's go ahead and remove the selection one. And let's see what happens now. So go back to the workbook. And let me zoom in. It'll make it easier to see what's going to happen. Let's just select this row right here for store 2. Now some formatting changes, you'll notice, will apply to everything, all of the selected cells. One of them, the active cell one, will only apply to the first cell that I clicked, which is this cell right here, which is the currently active cell. So let's run the macro and you'll see that. Okay. Okay. So it's a little difficult to see with the colors, but you'll notice that cell A4 is the only one that has bold. So if I go to the Home tab, click this cell, we can see that the B is highlighted for that one. And over here you can see the B goes away. So A4, bold, B4, no bold. If I click, like this for example, and drag over, all four of these cells are selected, but A4 is the only active one. So watch what happens when I type. This is how you can test it out. Active. Then I hit enter, and it moves to the next cell in the selection, and now this is the active one. Active. But the macro doesn't hit enter. The macro only sees one cell that is active, the first cell, and then it does something with that. So maybe I shouldn't have actually hit enter to go to the next cell. I hope that's not too confusing. But the point is, wherever I select, so I select here and drop down, this one is the active one right here, 544. Okay, if you go ahead and click a bunch of cells using control, so this is the first click cell, and then I click here, here, and here. This one here is the active cell now. You can see because it still has a white background. So when I start typing, active. So if I ran the macro, it would have run on this cell right here. All right, let's go ahead and undo those changes. Okay, store to. But of course, I can't undo the changes from the macro. So I will go ahead and remove the formats. Okay, or just leave it in. That's okay. Now let's go back to the VBA window. Okay, and I'll put a little note here. Do something with the, let's say, well, I'll just call it active cell. You should know what that means by now. Active cell within a selection, or the only cell that was selected. Maybe that sounds more confusing. Well, if you get confused, just come back and watch the description I just gave. So these are the three ways that you can reference the cells. Really, the two that are going to pop up here are the range and then selection. An active cell is up to you if you want to change your macro. I'm going to go ahead and leave in the selection one. And now that we have selection again, everything is totally relative just to the single cell that's selected or all the cells that were selected, which is usually how you want the macro to work. Now let's go down here. Here we have another thing. This is going to change the underline style of the cell. But what I want to talk about are these with blocks, which for some reason they really annoy me. I know they're helpful, but they just annoy me. So what this says is you have with, and then at the end with, and here, right after with, is what you want to appear at the start of every line inside with and end with. So this right here, with selection.font, and then one line, .theme color, next line, .tint shade, is exactly the same as writing this. If we went like this, selection font, and I went blop, blop, okay, and grab this guy and do that, grab this guy and do that. It is exactly the same. So the with block allows you to just not have to type this thing in front of it. So don't freak out if you see that. All it's saying is, let's do something with the font, okay? Selection.font. We could have put some additional options in here also. They just sort of split them up in a funky way. So anything where it says selection.font, you could just put it inside the with and end with. I will comment these lines out now and just leave a little note. This is exactly the same as the previous with and with block just above here. Okay, and you can see that down here we have the same thing. Another with and end with block selection. So when you see it, just know that every one of these lines has selection in front of it. Now that we've done that, I want to go over how to get more information about the stuff that you see here. Because it might not, I mean, most of this is pretty clear, pretty understandable. However, for instance, I know that, where are we? Selection, okay, it works on the selection, does something with the font. Oh, it has to do with the underline. Okay, and the option is Excel underline style single. Okay, well, am I entirely sure what that means? Or do I want to get more information or figure out what other options I can put in here? This is how you can find out more information. So the first thing to do is to select everything here at the start of the line. Now maybe this is too much, maybe this is too little, but select all of it at first, copy it. Now let's open up our browser. And very important, you want to type MSDN space Excel space VBA. These three words, these three things, that's what you want at the beginning of everything you search for. Yes, you can go to teachexcel.com. Yes, you can ask on forums. Yes, you can go to so many different places. But this is the best way to get the best, most accurate information. Now, paste it in, hit enter, and what we should see are a bunch of links from Microsoft's website. So, perfect. Font.underline property Excel in parentheses. It won't always be in parentheses. So what we could do is click this one, open it in the new tab, click this one, open it in the new tab. And you really always want to go for the Microsoft website when you're doing this. Start there to get the most reliable information and also the most up-to-date information. Let's go to the first one, font underline property Excel. Okay, looks good. Now don't worry too much about a lot of this stuff. It could look confusing at first, but you'll start to get used to it. We have syntax, remarks, example. The example is the really good thing. It's what's going to look most like our macro, our thing over here. So selection.font.underline. So go down. There we go. Here you can see they used active cell. So as I mentioned, that's going to be in a lot of examples. Then .font.underline and right here. So we're on the right page. Now these programming kind of web pages aren't always super helpful. That is a warning, but this is really the best place to get a lot of information from. So what we want to do in this case is find out other options for the underline style. So under remarks, we see that it says can be one of the Excel underline style constants. Cool, I got a whole list now of the options that I can use for that, and it tells me what it means. So our option over here, Excel underline style single, we can see Excel underline style single, single underlining, single underline it should be. And you can see the other potential options. So if we want to make it double accounting, here we go, two thin underlines placed close together. Now I can copy that, go back here, paste that in, go back to Excel. No, I do not want to do that. Okay. And let's select the next line, store 3, run the macro, and the underline should be quite a bit different. There we go. So that is really the best way to figure out what something here means. And if you didn't find your answer by selecting all of this, well then take off the front part. Just take it off and search for this. Or select this down here, hit Control C, go over here, MSDN Excel VBA, paste that in, see what we get, and we get exactly what we want from the start. Now maybe if you're not familiar with programming or VBA, you might not think you're where you need to be when you see this screen, or even if you are, you might not. But you can see that there are many different ways to find the source. The most important part is always to type Excel VBA MSDN before everything and go to Microsoft's website for that when it deals with VBA. Now I said that I'd cover the absolute or the relative cell reference thing, so let's do that really quickly. So here I showed you how to make everything just apply to the cells that you select, and that's really cool. But if we go to use relative cell references right here, let's zoom in. Okay, use relative cell references. Now let's go ahead and record a macro. And macro 2, okay. Let's go here. Let's say I want to make this one underlined. And I want to make store 2 bold, store 4 bold, 6 bold, and this one underlined. And maybe this one. So it doesn't matter. I'm making arbitrary formatting choices here just so we can see how it works. Now let's go to stop recording. Okay. Visual Basic. Now in module 1, it already went to macro 2, but how we have it now is our first macro is up here, basic name. The second one will pop in right underneath it. Sometimes it'll pop up in a new module. It'll say module 2 over here. So now we have macro 2. And it looks a little bit different, doesn't it? So you now know what active cell means, right? That is essentially the currently selected cell in most cases. And now we have offset. Okay, so it moves it over one cell. So here we have the row and column offsets, how we want to move it up and down, left and right, back and forth. Let's say if I click over here, run the macro, let's see what happens. Macro 2, run. And you can see that it offset everything based off of the cell that I was clicking up here, which is F1. So we have bold and we have underline all in the same place. So that's really cool, and it works really well for this particular spreadsheet where the data is perfectly exactly the same formatted, exactly the same size, number of rows, number of columns, everything works just like that. So let's go back to Visual Basic. So active cell dot offset. Okay. Yeah, I'm not going to cover that here, but now you know how to get more information about offset, Excel, MSD, and VBA offset. Going to give you tons of good information. So I could really go on with this tutorial for basically ever, but what I wanted to do here is to give you the tools to make the most common and the most necessary changes, which is really to remove any hard-coded range references like this, range A2, and then to change them to either selections or active cells, or just really understand what that means. To understand the common sort of formatting thing with the code here that you see, which is with and end with, and then also to give you the tools you need to go forward and learn more about stuff that you don't understand here, to learn about the different options and exactly what all of this means, and to further build out your recorded macro without too much difficulty. Now that's all for this tutorial, and I hope you found it helpful. I hope you liked the tutorial. If it was helpful, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and make sure to subscribe and accept notifications so you can see all the new tutorials.